and people walk away happier. Now, it wasn't unless there was a shift of some sort from this to this that could happen. And that's very important and something I would encourage you all to reflect on when you find yourself in your next negotiation. So we have this. Now, in the spirit of this interest-based negotiation, we've got the core concerns. So now, why is it? What are the core concerns? What is the thesis that Riskin puts out there, which is really just explaining for you Shapiro and Fisher's thesis? Why are the core concerns helpful? And what are they? Maybe we can begin first with what they are. What are the 5 core concerns? Yes, Rebecca.
To be appreciated.
Appreciated.
To affiliate with others.
To affiliate.
Autonomy.
Autonomy.
Status.
Status.
Role.
Role. Okay, good. And now let's just talk briefly about these. What is role? What would be an example of role? Well, let's create a context for this. First of all, what is it that these 5 core concerns are intended, what role are they intending to play in a negotiation? Why would they be helpful to draw upon? There's a little bit of a circle, an egg here going on, an egg and a chicken, but we got to start somewhere. So each will inform the other. Yes.
So the article says that those are the 5 things that people, I guess it's important to them. Like it makes them feel good to fulfill these concerns. And so to understand someone's concerns, you can make your behavior kind of match what the other person wants in a way, in order to get not only like a better result for them, but also like more importantly like a result for you and like your client.
Okay, nice. So you got a handful of important pieces brought into what you captured by what you just said. So first of all, I heard you say these are things that matter to us, right? We like to be appreciated. We like to be affiliated with a group or connected to some organization, whether it's a law school or a student group or a team or whatever it might be. We like to have autonomy. We don't want to be micromanaged, right? We like to be able to make some decisions on our own. We like to have a sense of status, like if you're in an organization, we like to get promoted. We like to have, sometimes we'll take promotion over raise, right? That's how important it is to, and we like to have a role. We like to have something to do. We like to matter. So they're saying, okay, these are 5 things that we all tend to, in one form or another, leads to a more positive, affirmed state. And when they become compromised, what begins to happen? What begins to happen when they become compromised? Negative emotions, okay. And without even having to look at these, when you're in a negotiation and it starts off going well, and then it stops going well, what begins to kick in? A bunch of negative emotions. So they say because negative emotions can kick in, and we're not so good at managing all these emotions, especially because in the moment there's a lot of them, they can be complex, we may not even know what they are, it can be confusing to know. Here's an indirect method to be able to tap into that. Because if you don't feel appreciated, what might you be emotionally experiencing? Yeah.
Kind of similar to the example of like Newt Gingrich. With his negotiation, he didn't feel appreciated, so he had negative emotions such as anger and...
Very nice. I'm not appreciated. So they're not saying find anger. It can be challenging to find it. It can be challenging to manage it. But they know that if you don't feel appreciated, you might get angry. So if you look out for appreciation, you will find, well, what's another emotion? That was excellent. What's another emotion that can come from not feeling appreciated? Yeah.
The feeling of being
Taken for granted.
Taken for granted, right? And there's thoughts associated with that, right? So there's that feeling, there's that thought of being taken for granted, there's that uncomfortable feeling, right? That's different from anger, right? And we don't have to necessarily even try to zero in on that. So this is what's called an indirect, yes?
I guess it's similar to taking for granted, but maybe even a step further, taking advantage of.
Being taken advantage of, right. And so these are indirect, but they can be useful because we sort of get these. We can all relate to these in one form or another, I would suggest. I mean, I can. And when they're riding high, emotions go up. And when they are moving down, emotions can be challenged. And when you're in a negotiation, they talk about, and Professor Riskin zeroes in on this, but it's part of the fundamental core concerns approach. These are the core concerns, and they can be a lens and a lever. And Brittany, you began to talk to this as well. What's the lens aspect to this? You're in a negotiation. Let's just assume, for the sake of argument, although this isn't the way it goes, that you're perfectly steady. I mean, part of this is that it works both ways. But let's say you're perfectly steady. But nonetheless, the person you're negotiating with is not liking the way it's going. And they become very emotionally caught and resistant, and they want to call it off, and they're not really listening, and all that stuff. What would be using the core concerns as a lens? What would that mean? Yeah. No, you. Thank you.
Noticing the emotion that's springing up and thinking about it within the context of like what just like transpired, what was like the last few things that were stated, and then kind of figuring out which one of these it goes to. So you're kind of...
Okay, well, that's interesting. They might say that, and he might have said that. I don't know that that's primary. I think you're zeroing in on it, and you're adding a little bit more, giving a little bit more credit to the negotiator in the moment to be able to tap into what are these underlying emotions, and then let me now tether it to one of these. You can sort of go right to the point of saying what might be at play here, right? So it's an indirect method. Now, if you're able to assess, I'm sorry if I got you angry. I mean, that would be sort of, or I can tell that I got you angry, and I get now that I think about what I said, that was pretty brusque of me and not very thoughtful. Yes, I was angry. And that would be directly noticing, acknowledging, and being skillful in response to an emotion. But here, we may not know, like even anger, well, if you don't have autonomy, might you get angry? If you don't feel that you have a status, might you get angry? Anger can flow through a lot of these. In fact, every emotion can probably flow through a lot of these. But to keep it easier, it's as a lens, when you notice that it's not going so well, that's why I say you're in a steadier place, so you can notice that and manage it a little bit. You might begin to say, which of these are being compromised in this moment? It's almost you got a little checklist. Are they feeling like they don't have autonomy? Oh yeah, the person next to them, their negotiator for them, the client, is saying, right? Maybe it's like, well, I'd be very interested in hearing what they have to say, what they have to say, and then boom, that boosts their, or whatever that might be, if that would be appropriate. So do we get that it's a lens? It's a lens through which we're looking to diagnose. And then it's a lever. In what way is it a lever? Yeah, Michael.
Expressing what they're saying to you, repeating it back to them is a way to do that. Especially in mediation, mediators oftentimes will listen to what the person says and then repeat it right back to them, and then repeat it back to the opposite party. And then when they listen to what the opposite party has to say about it, they use the lens, they ask the question the same, they go through the core concerns test, they ask those questions, what do you not appreciate about this? What makes you feel like disaffiliated? And that's basically how they use it. They use those core concerns.
Okay, so that's interesting. I'm going to, a nod to everything you just said in a nice way that you brought it into the mediation context. But I'm going to play with that a little bit. What I heard you say was there's a device that can be called, for want of other framings, mirroring. To be able to parrot back, to say what was heard, to create an opportunity, and in doing so, like what I heard you say was that in the mediation context, mediators do this, where they'll notice something and then they will say it back to the person, right? That's more or less what I heard you say. Yes? You're nodding?
Yeah.
Did I get that sort of right?
Yes.
Okay. And in doing so, you feel what? You feel,
Affiliated, appreciated.
right, you might feel appreciated, right. So you spoke to a very effective, and next week when we get into mindful listening, a very effective aspect of communication skills that certainly are very important in the mediation and negotiation context. But I would suggest that the one you just threw out there really is in the service of, as you noted, so they can feel more appreciated perhaps, like now they matter, that it touches on one of or more of these by doing that, yes. And so as a lever, if you want to bump up feeling appreciated or something, then do something like that because it bumps up this, their own internal lever on this, yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else on the use of it as a lever? Yes.
So I sort of saw these as like universal insecurities like we all have. Like all of this I think can apply to everyone in every interaction. Like we all seek these things. So I guess like how you sort of like navigate through the world of being aware of all these, especially in negotiations, and like validating people's like ego in a sense on these is how I think you like, that's what it's meant to leverage.
Okay, now you're using leverage in a
Like
different
how you
sort of
act,
way.
Like yeah.
But so part of what I'm hearing you say is sort of this is the domain of the ego.
Yeah.
The ego cares about all these things, right? And a healthy ego is a useful thing to have. So the ego cares about these things. You can boost the ego, right? And you sort of said we all have our insecurities, and those insecurities is the ego saying something's not right, and this is a way of sort of gauging or getting a little bit of an inside look at what might not be going right. Say more about the use of it. You said to leverage, but as a lever, as an instrument in a negotiation, what might you do when you notice that so you do the lens, and I encourage you later today with a friend, at home with a family member, in a conversation with somebody, when you begin to notice a little snow globeness, just sort of inquire, I wonder which of these might be going on, and then in realizing it as a lens and diagnosing it, then offering something to readjust it. So what would be using it as a lever? Maybe this is what you meant, but just say it again because leveraging took me off in a different direction.
Like an example?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have a good example.
You usually do. Last week, I loved last week's conversation.
All right, well, this actually happened. So, me and my girlfriend go out to
It,
dinner.
it didn't just happen, just so you know. It actually happened.
Yeah, it's a real story. So, I always like pay, and then we like Venmo and split the check, but like, I always round up, like whatever, like who's caring about it? So we went to Publix the other day, and she takes her seat and starts like itemizing it. And so I'm like losing my mind, I'm catching myself before I spiral, but I was aware of it, and I was still like, I'm still gonna spiral because this is ridiculous. And we get in this whole thing, and she's like, like, whatever, and like she's buying like flax peanut butter, like stuff I'm never gonna eat. And I'm like, if you want to start doing this, like, whatever. Anyway, so yeah, I said I gave up. I went in, and so whatever. So
Wait, I gave up by what?
like I just went in for. I was just like.
You let her. You let her. You didn't have a lot of autonomy.
No, I had. Well.
She was in charge. You didn't feel appreciated.
I didn't feel appreciated because I don't like do that. You know,
I love this. Autonomy,
Like our
status.
affiliation was sort of under fire because it's like our relationship. You know, like our autonomy. It's like my money, your money. Like, what are we doing? And then like. My role in this whole thing was like, okay, I pay, I don't like bust your butt about it, and now you're gonna like do this, so, okay. And, right, and I acknowledge that. And then I was like, all right, like what's going on here? And so, after like a few moments of silence, of just like, you know, whatever, I was like, what is going on? Like, what is going on? Like, why are we doing this? Right. and then I moved into that, and then she gave me this reason, which like makes perfect sense, which is like back to the just the overall understanding, and then my side was now like, okay, say that at the beginning, you know.
Yeah, it would be nice if we could say it at the beginning.
Right.
Right, but we tend not to.
Right.
And then, and here's what, oh yeah. So, first of all, I mean, I don't, the non-judgmental piece of this exploration is, I think, important, but what a nice story, right? I mean, what a lot of insight for both of you, because she had to catch herself along the way also.
Yeah.
So, but because you had, and this is important, it was because the snow globe was going, because the spiral was going, that all of a sudden you, and I think you're a very insightful person, and I loved, like, I knew my spiral was going, but I was continuing on. That's really a very interesting place to be, because you know you have a choice. You see clearly to some extent what's going on, and you still take that road because it's such an uncomfortable place to be. And or maybe you also deep down go, I want to resolve this. I want to resolve this. So it could have been a real blowout that could have really disrupted. And we all probably have had relationships where something happens that really temporarily or for a longer term just disrupts that relationship. Because we stay here or wherever it may be, or we just sort of just say, I'm out of here. And we don't necessarily have that larger understanding. So what's important I want to share with you, and I think this gets back to what Chris said earlier, is realizing the snow globe, realizing the spiral, then creates an opportunity to shift in the direction of noticing, paying attention. That can be a settling quality because you're not feeding, you're not shaking up as much just by paying attention, by observing. That's one of the insights of the snow globe. You put it down, and just by observing, you are contributing to its settling, even though things are still going on that aren't the way you want them to be necessarily. To then have a little bit more of your capacity to do something or offer something that can be useful to happen, which it sounds like did happen. And part of the reason why we are practicing, even in the midst of, and it's almost like when you sit down for 10 minutes in the morning and there is a dog barking or there is something that's annoying you, to be able to say, there it is, it's not that, it's this, I'm resisting it. If I grew up and my grandfather was always mowing the lawn and I love that because, I love, it's not the thing, it's our resistance to the thing. And so to stay steady, there was a certain, I'm just projecting onto the really terrific story you told, there was a steadiness that you were able to carry even in a moment of agitation. That allowed what's going on here. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, it's a lens and a lever. Now, here's the thing. The way we have thus explored from a position-based to interest-based, looking at these core concerns. Why are they relevant? Because, as was pointed out, we have negative emotions that can derail the exchange. So when these negative emotions are arising, we sort of begin to check in on this. We check out and say, what might be going on? What might be low in the people I'm with in terms of this negotiation? What might I tap into? And to something you raised very important, you said, well, appreciated, that was the real one. And appreciation is, well, I'm giving the answer, but I'll ask it because it's important. He comments on how of all of these, one of them sort of rises to the top as being perhaps the most important one, which is which? To be appreciated. And you know situations where you don't get the apology or you're asked to leave something and no one says thank you for all that. I mean, it's like to be appreciated, not as a throwaway token, but as a serious gesture. And I would suggest to you, when we talk with Paul Singerman next week, he's going to talk about gratitude and the importance of gratitude. which is to appreciate something, someone. You know, this week, in addition to the mindful listening exercise we'll be doing, you know, see how you might, in a very genuine and authentic way, because that's what he said. It must be genuine. It must be authentic. I mean, you can do this as a device, but that's not what's intended. Appreciate somebody in your midst. Let them know. Not that you don't already appreciate them, but they may not know. They may not know. And we all have our ups and downs, so that can be helpful. Okay, now.